it's a pleasure to invite James back again for a couple of sessions. And James, thank you so much for being with us on this day when Mercury is going retrograde. And it's been stationed for a while. So a warm welcome to you, James.
Thank you. And I've been working on, I should tell you right in the beginning, this is my first book that was written in 1985.
Right.
I've been working for 6 months, 7 months on this, updating it. I lost a couple of months. We went to France and I lost all of January because we're redoing the house, but I'm close to getting, the whole thing is being updated. So it should be out a couple months.
Okay, so we look forward for it. We look forward for that book coming up in an updated way, James. So, James, you told me that stationary retrograde was very intense, and it is a very important. Why do you say so, James?
For example, I haven't heard, there was a particular friend, haven't heard from a couple of months. I said, gosh, I wonder what happened. Did I say something wrong? Today, there's an email from that person. When Mercury station, and this is the reason that I scheduled today's appointment, Mercury is just beginning to go backwards. I think it was stationary yesterday or, early in the morning.
Early morning, yes.
On the station of Mercury, I always leave that day for writing or teaching or communicating. It's the strongest position of a planet. The planets are all moving forward. And then occasionally, not the sun and moon, but the other planets, they begin to slow down and then they stop. That's called stationary retrograde. Then it goes backwards a month or 2 months or 4 months, and then it stops. That's called stationary direct, and then it begins going forward. On the day any planet stations, Jupiter, Saturn, Mercury, there will be very powerful energy from that planet. For example, Donald Trump has stationary Jupiter in the second house, the house of money, station. But it was in a bad sign, Virgo. So the second house is the speaking, so he's constantly lying. And from the time he was a little baby, he was wealthy because his father had all this money coming in. And so his father took a couple $100,000 because he didn't want to pay the taxes on it, so he put it in his baby's bank account, so that it would be there. And it's kind of corrupt money because it's not really his. He's doing it to avoid taxes. So that's a stationary Jupiter in the second house. He makes a ton of money, but some of it is by corrupt means. But the stationary Jupiter, this is why also he makes these very phenomenal statements. This is the best ever. This is the worst terrible thing. It's always extreme, because the Jupiter is stationed. It's very powerful. It is very powerful. So when Mercury stations, I've always noticed that when it stations, my writing is more powerful, it's deeper, it comes out easier. If it's a Venus station, that's a good day to approach someone that you want to have a relationship with. If it's Jupiter, that station, that's a good time to do something with a guru or spiritual teacher. And Mercury is stationed and then pretty quickly goes backwards or forwards. The other planets, Jupiter or Saturn, when that stations, that's going to be moving so slowly that you'll get a couple days of power out of those planets. But there's nothing more powerful. And if you're doing Prashna, Horary in the west, Prashna in the east, stationary direct is far superior to stationary retrograde. In a natal horoscope, it pretty much doesn't matter whether it's stationary direct or stationary retrograde, it's going to be powerful. But if it's a chart that you're doing for the moment, the person asks the question, will my husband come back? Will I get this job? If it's a stationary direct, meaning it's stationed and it's about to go forward, that's far superior to the stationary retrograde. So that's why I scheduled it today, because I figured this will be a good session. And in fact, I want to talk about, I think I've said this before. I think I said today is the most important lesson, but I may have said that once before, but today is even more important. Today, I want to speak about how to study Jyotish. This seems like it would be obvious, but it really and truly is not, okay? So I do a lot of YouTubes, and I get a lot of clients from these sessions. And they call up, and many of them say, I've read all your books. I've listened to every YouTube you've given. Then I'll be doing their horoscope, and I'll say something which is something I've taught over and over. And they'll say, really? Oh, I didn't know that. Really? Oh, I thought it was some other way. And I thought to myself, how is this happening? You know, if they listen to all my YouTubes and they're telling the truth, and they've read all my books, how are they not getting what I'm teaching? So I began to think about it, and I realized, how did I learn? I learned orally. I don't learn so well from books, but some people do. But I learned orally. So both times when I went to India, my teachers taught me in the daytime, at night, from 7 o'clock to 10 or 11, they would teach me. And the next day, I would have nothing to do all day but wait for the session. I had brought a very small tape recorder with me, and I would listen to the session over and over and over and over. And in particular, this is more my second teacher. My first teacher was more of a scholar. That was Santanam. And he was teaching me the basics of the system anyway. Padya, when I saw Padya, I'd already been using the system for a year and a half. And you know, so I had a better grasp of it. But he would constantly say things like, he would say some, oh, if the second house and the sixth house are very prominent, you have a therapist or a counselor, okay? Things like that. And sometimes I say, really, why? And he'd say, I have marked this. And when he said, I have marked this, I have noticed this,
It's experience.
it means so much. He even said one day, I'll never forget this. One day he said to me, I have marked that if a planet is in the same degree as another planet, it's making an aspect. So you could have Venus in 2 degrees Pisces, and if you had the sun in 2 degrees Leo, 2 degrees Libra, there was an aspect. This is not traditional Hindu astrology. He had he had seen from his experience that when 2 planets were in the same degree, they were forming an aspect. What he had done through his experience was to discover Western astrology. That's how Western astrology works. The best thing about Western is the houses. That's why there's so many different house systems in the Western system. The houses don't work so well. But the aspects are wonderful. The squares, the trines, the sextiles, the oppositions, they work very well. So the best thing that you get from a teacher is when they tell you something that this is what I have seen through experience. So what's happening today is that people are learning Jyotish. They go on a YouTube and James Raha said this, and then, oh, this other guy said that if you have a planet near Ketu, it causes ear problems. And this other astrologer said this, and the other astrologer said that. This is no way to learn. This is no way to learn. The way to learn is to find the teacher that you resonate with. Find the teacher that seems to be the most accurate. Find the teacher that when you hear them speaking, you go, yes, he knows what he's talking about. And study only with that teacher until you get everything that teacher has to teach. I'm going to say that again. Find the teacher that you think knows what they're talking about, that is accurate, that where you feel a good compatibility with, and study with that teacher only. Learn everything they have to teach. And after you've learned everything they have to teach, it's fine. Go listen to some other opinions. But the idea of taking one opinion of one opinion, you'll never get it. And the other thing is, I mean, look, let's be honest. Probably 80% of the people that watch the YouTubes are just interested. They're interested in astrology. They want to know how it works. They want to learn, but they're not necessarily going to be professionals. And I'm really speaking to the people that are more serious. It's such a difficult discipline. It is so monstrously difficult. I look back to my first 10 years, and all the mistakes that were made. And then another decade goes on, and then another decade. There's so many mistakes that you make as you are learning. They say that, oh, if a person does a particular field, music or this or that, for 10,000 hours, you know, now 10,000 hours is a random figure. It may be 8,000, it may be 12,000. But what they're saying is you need a certain amount of experience. If you do astrology, for 2 hours a day for 50 weeks, it will take you 20 years. It'll take you 20 years that'll get you 500 hours a year, 52 hours a day. 1 year will be 500 hours. By 20 years, you start to know what you're doing. This may sound funny, but it's not, because I look back to the mistakes that I make and I think, oh my Lord, the karma that I've incurred by telling people that was not right, things that were not right. But then I realize also that it took me that long to get to the point where I can really do some good and really be accurate. So the other thing is, that I think that it's more of an oral tradition. I think that the easiest way, maybe, everybody learns differently, but I think listening to it and hearing it, that's what I think works. And when you are studying with somebody that has experience and that has learned, and when they particularly say, look, I know this because I've seen it over and over, those are the things that you take, and you can't use it just because they say that. You have to test it out. But if they're 20, 30 years into it and they're telling you, I've seen this work over and over, it probably works. And you start to use that. And as you use more of the techniques that work and you use more of the positions that indicate something accurate, you get better and better and better. But this is an extremely important point. I remember when I started going to conferences, and I would say, oh, well, this is a really interesting subject, right? So I would go to that. But if the teacher was not so good, it was useless. And what I found was, when I found a teacher that was really good, it didn't matter what they were speaking about. They could be speaking about Rahu-Ketu. They could be speaking about Panoti Yoga. They could be speaking about whatever. You find the person that you think knows the most and you study with that person. It is the most important thing, but you have to listen over and over. So I went to the Vedic Astrology conference in Sedona, and let me say it like this. The most important features of the horoscope are the moon and the ascendant. The sun is very important as well, but the ascendant and the moon are the foundation for the person. They are the foundation. They never change. Now, I've done 40 years of self-improvement, self-development, self-improvement. I did so many spiritual techniques, so many workshops over 30 years. And I could get better and better, and I could lose a lot of neuroses, etc. But the fundamental strength, fundamental strength of my confidence has never wavered. It has always been low. It has always been weak. It has always been low. It never wavers. The person who has a strong moon and they have a strong first house, their confidence never wavers. They come into the world like Donald Trump, I know it all, and I'm great, and I feel confident, I never worry. And that never changes. Okay? So when I had to do the Sedona, the reason I've said this before, the reason I don't do conferences is because as soon as I agree to do them, I start worrying. So I spent an entire year, I'm not kidding, in the middle of the night, I would think of something that I wanted to say that took me years to learn. In the middle of the night, I'd say, do I have to wake up and write this down, or will I remember it tomorrow? This went on for a year. So the title of one of the lectures was What I Wish I Knew 40 Years Ago. And so I wrote down all of these different things that took me years to learn. And in the beginning of the lecture, I said, a lot of what I tell you is going to sound like common sense, and you won't write it down. And even if you do write it down, you're likely to forget it. I said, please buy the recording. I don't get a toaster if you buy the recording, okay? Buy the recording. There were 75 people in the room. 12 people bought the recording. So that's fine. They can, however they want to learn is fine. But I'm telling you, if you want to get good, you find the people that have seen this work, and there's no other way. You have to memorize it. So this is the most important thing I can tell you, unless you just want to enjoy astrology and this guy said that and this guy said that, and that's fun too. But you know, that's not what I'm about.
Yeah, because even in the olden times, James, people would learn from a teacher. As you just said, they stick to a teacher. You learn all the teacher has, and that Guru Shishya Parampara, it went down and down, and it gave results. It gave its fair share of results.
Yeah.
Even in
Well,
India,
if you look at the books, the Hindu astrology books, they're not very good, and the ancient ones, they're very good for all the techniques, but they're not particularly good when it comes to teaching the interpretation of the horoscope. They're not so good. I'm not certain that they wanted to write it down so that everybody could get it. They wrote a certain amount down, but really you learn from your teachers. And even the biggest problem, I've tried to correct this in my updating of my ancient Hindu astrology book. When I started and I wrote my books, I did it the way the others did it. If a planet was in the 8th house, it was ruined. But they're not telling you the other things that are obvious. So if the sun is in the 8th house, the father dies early. This is what there was, something like that. But they're not telling you the obvious. The sun is the soul. It's in the house of metaphysics. The person will be highly interested in metaphysics. They don't tell you that. They don't tell you so much of it. So this is why you need a teacher. And, you know, the way to do it is to hear the information over and over and over and over.
Yes, that's a very beautiful take on because even as a you know, person who interprets charts and reads, does a lot of reading, I also face the very same issue that you're talking about, where people say that I've heard this from this one and heard this from some other person, and you have to reconcile facts, and you have to tell them that if you need to learn astrology, you need to learn it in a very systematic manner, and you can't go about one from here and one from there. You will not be able to ever learn that. So this is something that I have also.
That's exactly right. You will never be able to get it if you learn from 4 different people. Now look, let's say that you study with me. If you study with me, you're not going to get that much. You may notice this. I don't talk that much about the dashas and the transits. I do, but not. Some people specialize in future predictions. I specialize in the natal horoscope, and my belief is that if you know natal astrology, you will be able to do the dashas. If you know what the planets are doing natally, you'll understand the dashas, you'll understand the transits. But every astrologer has their own specialty. So if you study with one teacher, you study until you have drained them, until you've taken everything they have to teach.
Exactly.
And then you go to that next person knows what they're talking about. So another thing is, one of the strongest things I can say, you know, partly based upon after you're doing this for about 20 years, you start to realize the stupid things you've said to people, the mistakes you've made, you know. So in every reading that I do, no matter how dramatic the prediction is, this is the worst period you're going to come to. There's no way you're going to get away with this without trouble. No matter how strong I am, then I say, but listen, this is astrology. I've been wrong before. you know, it's not an absolute science. And I could be wrong. Maybe it won't happen. Those things have to be said. They have to be said, partly because of how gullible people are. Oh, they told me I could never be a writer. I could not be a writer. And I said, and you believed that? And they go, yes. And I said, but wait, you wanted to be a writer? Yes. But they told you you couldn't be a writer? Yes. So you didn't try to write? They go, that's correct. This is not something an astrologer should be proud for. A person comes and they say, I want to have children, and the 5th house is not good, and Jupiter's not good. I am not going to be responsible for the karma of telling them not to have children. I will tell them the 5th house is troublesome, Jupiter is troublesome. I would expect there to be problems, but if you want children, you should have them. Then they'll say, what kind of problems? I said, well, what are most problems with children? Some get into drugs, some are very resistant to their parents, some children have problems. It could be any of them.
You
But
could
the
have
point is-
conceiving children also. You could have problems
Yes.
conceiving children also.
Yes, yes, but assuming, the thing about that is when it's that bad, I will say you better start soon, because you know,
Yeah,
if you
the
think you're going to
later
have
you
them at
delay, the
35 or
more
40
problems
with
you
this
will have.
this chart,
Yeah.
yeah, it really, seriously, it is, if the 5th house is weak. So, you know, things like that. But the things that you can learn from your astrologer, that where they say, I have marked this, I have noted this, you can bet on them. And the more that you have of these statements that you can bet on, the less you have to lie or make definite statements about things where you just don't know. You say, I don't know that. That I don't know because it's not clear. So some of the things, like, for example, I spoke about children. How long did it take for me to find out that the first child, you could see maybe Jupiter aspects the 5th house and Mercury aspects the 5th house, and maybe Mars is in the 5th house. There could be 2 or 3 children. The most obvious feature, the most obvious, the one where as soon as you look for the 5th house, there's something right there obvious, that's going to be the first one. So if there's a fallen planet in the 5th house, that first child is going to be the one with problems. They won't all have problems. That one will. Or if Mars is in the 5th house, but Jupiter and Venus aspect. Jupiter and Venus have very specific meanings, but Mars is sitting right there. It's the first thing you see. The kid is probably going to be mechanical or in sports. These are things it takes years to learn. And this is why I'm saying, you listen to the astrologer and you hear it and you test it and you hear it, you'll become very good. Chandra Lagna, one of the things that I spoke about in the conference is that the planet opposite the moon, it works in relationship better than the 7th house. I can bet on, if there's a planet 7 houses away from the moon, it's going to give you more accurate, definite information than the 7th house. My belief, I don't find Chandra Lagna to be, I don't use Chandra Lagna very much, because looking at the whole chart, which is the way you're supposed to do it, doesn't work that great. But when I see a 7 houses away from the moon, that I can bet on it. And that's the kind of thing, I suspect that that's why they started to use Chandra Lagna, because they saw how powerful the 7th. The rest of it, not so much for me. A fallen planet, if there's a fallen planet in the 7th house from the moon, or a fallen planet in the 7th house, yes, it makes relationships difficult. But the one thing you can bet on is that there's going to be something wrong with that person. There's going to be some major flaw that everybody can see. These are things that it takes you a while to figure out, but once you figure them out, you can bet on them. Afflicted Mercury. Over the years, I've done who knows how many thousands of horoscopes. But if the person has afflicted Mercury and they're 40 or 50 years old, if they have been doing pranayama, if they have been doing meditation, they won't be so nervous. If they have not been doing that regularly, you'll hear it in their voice. They're nervous, they're wired. It's just, where do you get that from? You get it from the experience. Oh, here's this person's going to be wired and nervous, but then they're not. And then I find out they've been meditating. So these are the things that you don't necessarily find them in books, but the teachers will tell you if you have a teacher that knows what they're doing and you listen and you learn.
And that
Another
brings
thing.
to a very beautiful quote from the Bible: "Ask and you shall be delivered." And even the Gita says that if you ask an elderly person, I mean, it's not just the age, the wise men, with a lot of reverence, they will deliver it to you. It is delivered to you. So that, yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
So we had a lawsuit. My brother, I think I told you this, that my brother passed away in 2016 and left us some money, and but he had a stepson that had been out of the picture for 20 years. My brother's wife died 20 years ago. 20 years before my brother died, she died. And this stepson comes along and throws 3 frivolous lawsuits at us. And we had a choice of going with this older woman that had more experience. She was a lawyer, who said, well, how much does he want? And we said, I don't know. I think he's talking about $15,000. And she says, well, that's a no-brainer. I would just give him that. And we were just disgusted by this, because this guy we're going to reward this guy for throwing frivolous lawsuits. The younger lawyer says, oh, I'll be able to knock him out in 6 months. It'll be over. 3 months, it'll be over. Took 2 years, cost way more than $15,000. Now, I don't know that I would have been thrilled to give him that, to give him $15,000 for, and there's no way of knowing. Maybe he would have said, oh, maybe I'll take more. Who knows? But in retrospect, I know this: I would always go with the person that has more experience. And that's how it is with astrology. At the same time, I always think back when I was in Benares. No, not Benares. I was in Agra. And I went to see, I went looking for astrologers, and I found this astrologer. He was maybe 85 or 90. This man was old. And he had a whole group of people, waiting to ask questions. He was basically doing Prashnas for people. And finally, I got to him, and I, after I asked my question, I said, ask him if he'll teach me. And the look on his face of pain was so enormous, because he had so much. He couldn't even bear the thought. I said, all right, never mind. But the point was, over the however long he'd been doing it, he had picked up so much information, so much. And so it's just very important. If you actually want to learn how the system works, you have to find someone that you think is good, that you relate to, and take, and you'll find out. You'll find out, because as they're telling you these things, you'll be testing them. And if they don't work, get the hell out of there. People don't know this, but I was, when I went to India the first time, I was traveling for 3 months, and I met, three or four different astrologers. I didn't stay with any of them. And one of them, it was the first, or the second one, the first astrologer that I paid. He was the one that said, you'll write books. But aside from that, there wasn't much, you know what I mean? So I wasn't going to stay with him. You have to pick who you're going to listen to.
That also comes from because let's not forget, James, that you had been doing Western astrology for some time by then. So you would have learned a few things there. And that comes with experience of understanding what you really want, where you want to go, and whom you can connect to on a certain level.
Yeah, but the thing is, even if I had not known Western astrology, even if I had not known Western, I mean, with that first one that I paid, there just wasn't much information that was important about my life. There just wasn't, so, and when I finally,
maybe you were not able to connect. Maybe there was a level of connection was not there as it was.
Maybe he was not a good astrologer. Maybe. I mean, look, it doesn't matter how good he is. If he's not good for me, he's not good. Exactly. So that's what I'm saying to the people that are listening. Find the one that you think is making sense. That's the one to study with. But to study with them, it's not like you listen to the YouTube and then, okay, I'll wait for the next YouTube. That's not going to work either. You have to hear it over and over until it sinks in. Mars in the fourth house. Mars in the fourth house can be, oh, you fought a lot with your mother. Oh, your mother was aggressive. Your mother was angry. Your mother was physical. That's one possibility. Another possibility is when you're with your mother, that's when you assert yourself. So it can work either way, but you don't know this at first. Mars in the seventh house. Oh, the partner is all Marsy. The partner's aggressive, and the partner's in the military. Could be that, but it also could be that the person with Mars in the seventh house, that's where they assert themselves. In their marriage, they assert themselves. Could be either way. Same with Saturn. Saturn, when it's conjunct a planet, usually makes that planet weak or harms it. Sometimes Saturn makes that planet give form and structure to that planet.
Exactly.
So Saturn conjuncting Venus can ruin the arts, or it can make the person very talented in the arts. Saturn next to Mars can restrict the person's ability to get angry, or it can make them extremely angry. But these are things you won't find in the books. You have to get them.
Practical, yes.
Comes from
practical
practice.
Experience, yes.
And you have to hear it over and over until it sticks. So it's, yeah.
So before we move on to our next topic or to our next video, before we wind this up, could you give a few more of your, because yours was the first book, in fact, which I had read, where there were so very definite principles about retrograde, and that had me mesmerized, because retrograde is something not everybody wants to write or discuss about. And
right.
The
thing is, in my first book, I was saying a lot of what other teachers had told me and what books had said. I've had to change this first book. As I'm updating it, I find all these things. One of them is retrogrades. Retrogrades, when I wrote the book, I would say, oh, this planet is retrograde, and so there's a problem with this area, right? And I was somewhat right. If the ruler of the fifth house is retrograde, the person didn't necessarily have children. But I was thinking that it's an affliction. It's stopping the children. Not stopping the children. It's becoming passive. It's passive. So so the person could have 4 benefics in the third house. They could have, 3 Venus, Jupiter, Mercury in the third house. This is an artist. But if the ruler of the third house is retrograde, it's their choice. Do they want it? In other words, they could actually get to their adulthood, to the age of 29, following other paths and other things that they want to do, and they don't realize till they get to 27, 28, hey, I have these artistic abilities. That's only because the planet is retrograde that's ruling that house. And so it's passive, it's free will. I liken that to free will. So if the first retrograde, they're not necessarily looking for a big giant career. They're more passive. It doesn't matter so much to them. It's not a big deal. And then, the scriptures exaggerate. They say that if a planet is exalted but retrograde, then it's fallen. They're just exaggerating. What they mean is it's exalted, but it's retrograde, so it's not as good. It's passive. So you'd rather have Jupiter in the 10th house going forward, not going backwards. You'll get better results. On the other hand, if you have Saturn in the 4th house, which is very hard on the heart, the physical heart and the happiness, if it's retrograde, it's not so bad. Because, like they say, if it's exalted but fallen, it's the opposite and all that stuff. So if it's a negative, if it's Saturn in the 7th house, it's really rough on marriage. But if it's retrograde, it's not so bad. The partner may be older. There'll still be some karma, but for the malefics, it's better if they're retrograde in their house placements. So
it's a beautiful thing that we've caught up on with James to wind up this session, James told us to begin with what is the importance of a stationary planet and how does it affect us. He then went on to discuss about what and how you can study Jyotish, or rather how you should study Jyotish with a proper master, and how you should be listening to what they have observed and presented it to you on a platter to think and chew on. And finally, again, what a passive retrograde, how does a retrograde planet affect us in day-to-day life or in your natal chart. So many points in such a small time. Thank you so much, James, and we'll see you again in the next session.